Namaste, hello everyone. Welcome again to the NPTEL course, Role of Craft and Technology in Interior Architecture. Today we will discuss the module 10. So module 10 is the summary of the previous 4 modules that have been conducted during week 2 of this course, and we will be having a discourse on all the 4 modules, summarizing them. So to give an overview, what were the contents that were covered so far? We discussed interior architecture and the importance of documenting knowledge and skills. We talked about traditional knowledge systems and the ingenious skills of the communities. Then interior architecture, documenting materials, tools and techniques. And we also discussed traditional knowledge systems and the indigenous materials, tools and techniques. So majorly all the 4 modules were discussing the interior architecture and traditional knowledge systems, and in all the 4 modules we were talking about the different materials, tools, processes, techniques, and how the indigenous people and the indigenous communities nurture these traditional knowledge systems and interior architecture skills through generations of knowledge and wisdom. And towards the end, as usual, we will see some references that will help us to carry forward the research further as per our interests. So in the module where we were talking about interior architecture and how crucial is it to document the knowledge and skills within the realm of interior architecture, we were talking about different interior architecture styles and how it has a huge knowledge base and repository resources. And this knowledge base, sometimes it is formally documented, most of the times it is very informal and it is carried forward through oral narratives and it is not documented. So we were trying to establish the importance of documentation in this discipline of interior architecture, and while we document these interior architecture styles, the preliminary focus was to study and learn and understand the knowledge and the skills which are embedded within this interior architecture domain, and then how important it is to transfer them, to share them, to disseminate them, so that the current contemporary generations and the generations to come can learn from them and have a resource hub where all these knowledge and knowledge systems and skills, they are documented and they are kept safe. While we were discussing this module, we saw some examples from Uttarakhand. So this is a 300-year-old residence which we saw, and during this module we discussed the timber construction and these exquisite wood carvings that we see here on the slide, and we try to understand the knowledge base and the skills of the community which practice this kind of interior architecture style in timber and which was very skilled in these wood carvings. And we could learn that there are a lot of indigenous woods in Uttarakhand which are best suited for wood carving and this kind of traditional construction. So we could learn about this indigenous wood called tun, then the another one was thunair, then we came to know about another wood called the pine wood, which locally is called cheer, and then there is deodar which is found in the hills of Uttarakhand. So just by documenting this interior architecture of Khajanchi Mohalla, we could understand the materials that were used, what are the kind of skills that go into the making of these facades, and here that we see the openings. So this is how documentation enriches us and makes us understand certain skill sets, and we gather the knowledge about certain materials and their peculiarities. So this was one example. The same house, we also saw that it has lot of apen paintings which are done on the wall, and they are ritualistic paintings. We have been discussing them once in a while in lot of modules, and we could again understand what are the materials that go into the making of these wall paintings and what are their values and what are their meanings, why these people in Uttarakhand make them, what are their importance. So this we tried to understand. This was a very interesting slide that we had, where we tried to understand the very original motifs of this Apan art, and studying these original motifs, different kinds of motifs, geometrical, floral, and then religious like Vishnu Chauki, Swastik Chauki, and different kinds of flowers and bales that we see in the nature. After reading all this, we could understand that these motifs in Apan, they have also influenced the wood carvings. So when we see the wood carvings on the facade of these traditional houses, we see that there is an influence. What we see in the original Apan motifs, we also see that replicated or interpreted in the wood carvings. And again, they have a huge association as far as the lifestyle of the people go, and they have a lot of meanings hidden behind them. So these kind of discoveries, during which dynasty these original motifs were used and how they influenced the wood carvings, like one form of art influenced the other, these kind of connections and discoveries, we get to learn about them once we start documenting and studying these existing knowledge systems and tools and skill sets. We also saw this interesting slide where it was explained how a Swastik Chauki, which is another form of Apan, is actually made. So that it has this central chauki which is flanked by the borders on all the sides, and it starts from the center. It is a system of dots which creates a grid. So here we see the 81 dots which make a grid, and we see this form over here of swastik here, which is repeated in permutations and combinations, and then this gives us this Swastik Chauki, which is very important for the inhabitants of these residences in Uttarakhand, and they practice this as a ritualistic ceremonial art, and it has lot of value for them. So even the kind of skills that we are talking about, we are documenting how this Apan is actually made, starting from the base to this complete grid over here, and what is the mathematic or science behind it, what are the values. So in the previous modules, we actually discussed this entire process and skills and materials. So this gives us knowledge, it increases our knowledge, and through this documentation we are able to create this resource hub which will be beneficial for the generations to come. In the another module, we discussed about the traditional knowledge systems and the ingenious skills of the community. So we tried to understand what actually is the meaning or definition of traditional knowledge systems, and how are the ingenious skills and the communities placed within this gamut of traditional knowledge systems, what are their roles to play. So we just try to understand that traditional knowledge systems could be situated within varied contexts, and when we talk about the traditional knowledge systems, it is very crucial to talk about indigenous people, indigenous communities, their skill sets, and it's very important to document them, to understand them, to disseminate them, share them, transfer them, so that we have a very rich knowledge base, and we can understand a lot of these informal knowledge systems and styles of interior architecture which are practiced by these communities, and which are so much in harmony with the nature, and a lot of times they are not even given in the books. So it's very important to understand and have a first hand experience, to go on field, document, talk to people, listen to the stories behind them, and then share that knowledge. So while we were discussing this module, we could understand that traditional knowledge systems, they could be looked at as having three important nodes. One is know-how, then we have skills, and then practices, and they are developed and sustained by a community, and then these systems are passed on from one generation to another. And what is important here is that these traditional knowledge systems often form a part of this community's cultural or spiritual identity. So we were trying to understand traditional knowledge systems here. We also discussed during this module how traditional knowledge systems could be situated within different realms. So it could be talked about while we are discussing intangible cultural heritage, whether it's intellectual cultural heritage, different kinds of practices, knowledge system of traditional community, traditional cultural expression of folklore, content or substance of knowledge resulting from intellectual activity. Then it is something that includes know-how, skills and innovations. So these are different scenarios or realms within which we can situate traditional knowledge systems, and there could be more. This list is not exhaustive. We were just trying to understand an overview. Then we also try to understand how traditional knowledge systems could be looked at as a mixture of individual experimentation and innovation, the exclusive traditional knowledge base of a community, and the public domain of modern society. So how each of these have a contribution in creating this mixture which becomes traditional knowledge system. So we discuss this, and this is again a very interesting diagram where we try to understand how traditional knowledge systems have varied contexts. And then we can talk about traditional knowledge systems when we are talking about cosmetics, perfumes, like medicinal knowledge. We can talk about traditional knowledge systems. Ayurveda we have in India, which is a traditional knowledge system of medicines. Sustainable water resource management, environmental and biodiversity conservation, even the weaving. We saw a lot of slides on the traditional knowledge systems embedded within the craft of weaving. We will see few slides for revision and summary in this module also. Then for farming and agricultural knowledge base also, we have a lot of traditional knowledge systems embedded within this discipline. Customary law related to property rights. Then of course we have performing arts, we have music, fabrication, we have dresses, customs, material culture, handicrafts, handlooms, hairstyling, body decoration, jewelry design. And then here what is highlighted is traditional architecture and building techniques, which is what we are focusing throughout this course when we say interior architecture, traditional knowledge systems. So this is again a very important context within which we are situating the traditional knowledge systems. Then this again very interestingly we try to understand that what are the kinds of data that fall within this large umbrella of traditional knowledge systems, and we could understand these three broad categories: empirical data that comes through experience, historical data which comes through historical records and oral traditions, and then conceptual data which is somehow formulated and understood and analyzed with the help of these two. And we also try to understand that based on different sources there could be the traditional knowledge systems could be derived from three different sources: individual experience, contemporary modern concepts, and derived from traditional knowledge systems passed on for generations within the traditional knowledge holders community. So these were some interesting facts and some interesting diagrams which made us understand varied concepts and definitions and meanings of these terms, traditional knowledge systems, indigenous people, community. We also saw some definitions which exhaustively discussed what kind of knowledge does traditional knowledge systems include. So different approaches, we saw all that during this module. To sum up and to summarize, I have just put the visual infographic so that it becomes easier to understand. Then another module was on interior architecture, documenting materials, tools and techniques. So whenever we talk about the interior architecture styles, it is very important to understand different materials, tools and techniques that actually help in developing or creating that interior architecture style. So we tried to focus on this while we were discussing this module, and we tried to understand the importance of documenting the materials, tools and techniques through this example of Radha Swami Samad, which is in Agra. And we discussed some very interesting facts about this building, that it has been getting constructed since more than 110 years and the construction is still going on, and it's a very exemplary illustration which celebrates materials, tools and techniques, because in this building we see exquisite construction details, we see stone carvings, we see inlay, we see filigree work. We discussed all this, what all these techniques are, what is filigree work, what is an inlay, what is a carving, and then we saw certain videos where the karigars or the craft persons were demonstrating these techniques and their knowledge of material in which they were doing these. So if you want to understand the details, and if you have skipped those modules, please go back to them and see the details, how these techniques are carried and how they actually enhance the interior architecture of this building and help in space making and enriching the experience of the user when they are in this building. So yeah, very interestingly, this sectional elevation explained the placement of varied craft forms and techniques according to the eye level, and we discussed if somebody here stands here at the ground floor and they have to look all the way up to this spire and this dome, and how much detail here is done in in what scale and proportion, what is the level of detailing that somebody standing over here can actually see here all till this point, and what is the cone of vision that they have. So we discussed certain techniques. Over here we see the filigree work which is here in this dome, then we see this very intricate and deep detailed stone carving which is done in marble, which is here at the base of this dome. We saw the stone inlay work, and we saw the stone carving which is called Santarashi. So here in this building there is an exclusive use of marble, different kinds of marble, different colors, and what all different techniques have been used, and how these techniques actually create points of interest and experiences within this building. And once the user navigates from here vertically up, also within the building horizontally at different floors, there are different kinds of details one comes across, and stone as a material has been able to allow these details to be embraced and to be appreciated by the user. So here through this building we were trying to understand the importance of material, tools and techniques, and how this knowledge of indigenous community, these karigars and their skills actually helps in creation of different spaces in this built form. And it's not just the knowledge of structure or architecture, but very importantly to understand different tools and techniques and the materials that go into the making of these. Continuing this example, we also tried to learn from the documentation on the site which kinds of stones have been used for carving and inlay, and for a certain dimension of stone, say here in this case a jali, how much time does it take for the carvings to be done, for the polish to happen and the final assembly to happen. And again some other elements like a frame, how much time does it go into the making of this one frame in which this jali fits in. Also the details like capital of a double column which has very exquisite floral carvings, you saw the pictures in the last slide. How many months does it take to just make this capital of single double column. Also the details like what kind of stones in terms of sizes are available which are brought on the sites, and which is the maximum size of stone in which the inlay is possible, and these are the details that you get from the site. So this Samad, the Radha Swami Samad, it is built by a trust, and they have 3 workshops in which all this stone construction and detailing goes on. We also tried to comprehensively understand the distribution of work, how many people work on certain element for different sizes. So this was a very interesting inventory, and we discussed this in the module which focused on documenting materials, tools and techniques. So we were trying to understand for a certain material, for a certain technique or a process to happen for a certain size, how many karigars or how many people are required and how much do they work. So we were trying to understand the system of work on the site. Also, like for example here in the case of dome, there are different pieces of stones which are assembled, which are gathered to create these domes, and within that minarets and boards. So all those details we were able to understand through documentation, through inventory making. And this was a revelation when we did all the documentation, and we discussed in the previous module that this 50% of the building has the use of plain stone and the other 50 is extensive use of carving and inlay. So how much is the percentage which is taken up by these techniques and the skills that go into the making of these elements and the achievement of these techniques. So these are the kind of details that one gathers when they go to the site. They document, they understand the material, the kinds of techniques that the material embraces, and the skill sets of the karigars which are employed to make those. So these are very interesting facts that one gets to learn. Also in this module we understood something very interesting, because we are talking about documentation of materials and learning how the materials play a role in space making through different techniques. So we could understand, we could learn that marble was extensively used in this building because of course it's a spiritual building and it's considered pure, but very important to understand that it's easy to achieve geometry in marble. It allows for varied kinds of carvings. It doesn't crack or scatter easily. It has many colors and in natural pigments available over there. Wide range of carving and inlay is possible that we can see in the entire building from ground floor to the top floor. There's a huge range of carvings and inlay, different kinds, different motifs, different scales which is possible, and the work can still be done with hands, which is the most important point that I focused during this module, that certain power tools and machines are used, but most of the work is still done by hands, and those karigars are working here since generations and the employment is still there for them. So that's something which I really salute the makers and the organizers of this trust. We also tried to understand the hierarchy, how the work happens on site, what are the different designations, who all are the different masons and the karigars, and in terms of their learning experience, how much experience do they have and how much is the total number of the karigars. So all these details really help us understand also how the work happens on the site, what is the system, what is the hierarchy, how things they are done in a system in a way that they are organized properly. We saw different tools, because we are talking about documenting tools. So we saw different tools, power tools and machines which were used on the site for santarashi and inlay work. We also tried to understand how a karigar makes these drawings out of their own experiences and memories and then create something as beautiful as this. We saw all this in the previous modules. Finally, we discussed the traditional knowledge systems and the indigenous materials, tools and techniques, and we began with this very powerful slide where we were just trying to, where we felt very proud that India's knowledge systems have so much to offer, and if we see that these knowledge systems date back to ages ago, to Mohenjo-daro, to Harappa, and the knowledge systems existed. We had a profound knowledge of metal blending, casting, we had a knowledge of performing arts. So we started from there, and then we saw how there are different traditional knowledge systems that India has embraced, which are celebrated all over the world. We saw this very interesting slide, which is the work of Priyanka Mangaonkar. She is an assistant professor in Brick School of Architecture, and we could see the stages of transformation of terracotta, how it was used as a material for daily needs, and then all these stages till here today, how it is used as a construction material. Again, to take cues from history, see, we find the references of terracotta again in Harappa, how the dish containers and other objects were made out of terracotta. So it's a profound knowledge of this material that it could be used in all these different forms for different purposes. So documentation, understanding, studying help us create these links from history to the contemporary times and to understand the profound material properties and how they could be utilized for times to come and in the contemporary times as well. We saw these plethora of traditional knowledge systems from Uttarakhand, ranging from these Apan paintings to furniture styles, all the way to here we see the architecture, hill architecture. So in all these different forms and techniques, there is embedded a profound knowledge of materials, different tools, techniques, how do these objects and spaces get created. So we saw this plethora and we tried to discuss few of them. We saw this very interesting tradition in Uttarakhand where the clay idols are made by the women during this very famous festival. And this is again the knowledge of this material, how the woman is handling this material, and she is able to achieve perfect proportions and expressions, and also the natural dyes that go into the decoration, which are very eco-friendly. So all these skills, all the knowledge of these materials, they exist, they are with the indigenous communities and they need to be documented and transferred. We also saw how some art forms or techniques have transcended their making and now they have contemporary expression. So we see this seasonal grass, and these are tribal traditions, these are made by the tribals, and these they're all natural, they come from nature, and the tribals have learned them through living in nature, through observing from their surroundings, and they are the materials for future. If we understand how these materials grow, how they are procured from nature, and for what all purposes they could be utilized, they are all materials for future and they sometimes just remain untapped. So it's a very nice initiative by Alaya Design Studio that they are documenting and exploring products out of such materials. Another one on the same lines is Himalayan nettle. So through these documentation projects, through this documentation studio exercises, individual initiatives, we get to know about a lot of materials, traditional knowledge systems and interior architecture styles. We also saw the traditional knowledge systems which are embedded within this weaving craft, and we focus on Uttarakhand, and through illustrations we try to understand different stages, you know, what is yarn and what all are the different stages that go into the weaving and how the yarn finally reaches the loom. We try to understand what is handloom, what are the different components of a handloom, and what is a warp and what is a weft. So we try to understand all these important terminologies which are related to the weaving craft. We saw some pictures that explained the posture, how these karigars sit, what are the foot movements when the weaving is done. So all that we documented and we tried to learn and understand. We also tried to understand the documentation of traditional knowledge systems embedded within the Apan craft, and we saw, you know, starting from which materials are used and what is the stage one all the way till what is the final outcome. We saw that. So we saw from here all the different stages, how this again swastik chauki is made. We saw all these techniques, processes and skill sets, and these modules which focus on documentation really enriched us with knowledge about different materials, tools, techniques and traditional knowledge systems which are nurtured by these indigenous communities and which yet need to be documented and disseminated. So I would like to end with this interesting quote. Of course, we have references to follow. Craft has traditions in every culture of the world, with processes, materials, tools and even designs being recognizable across barriers of language, culture or religion. Craft can provide an excellent and leveling platform for cross-cultural, citizenship and humanities-based work. So, this module talks about role of craft and technology in interior architecture, and here this is what this quote is trying to establish, that craft is found in every culture. It can transcend the barriers of language, and it can really result in excellent work which is cross-cultural, humanities-based, need-based, community-based, and we can see the reflection of these craft skills and the understanding of knowledge and making also in the interior architecture styles and the principles of space making. So, this is what we are trying to learn through this course. Next module is going to be very interesting. It focuses on something called as creative and cultural industries, and we'll try to understand what do we mean by them, what is their significance, what is the scope, and what all can be done in this gamut of cultural industries, creative industries. Some references again. Now this is a summary, so I have just summed up the references from all the previous 4 modules. Thank you.